Welcome to my top 10 books of 2021 and 2 flowers. Hello, BookTube. This is Marilyn Maya, the baby boomer booktuber, and I have 2 flowers from my garden. This flower is not real. It's a plumera, and I have a tree in my front yard, and this is the real flower. It smells so beautiful. It comes in pink, yellow, and yellow and pink. And they're really, really beautiful. The smell, they're fragrant. This is the state flower of Hawaii. It's a hibiscus. And this is a hybrid hibiscus. They come in beautiful beautiful shades. And mine is pink in the middle and yellow. This one has a slight fragrance. They do hybrid hibiscus because most of the hibiscus don't have a strong fragrance. But when you use the hybrid hibiscus, when you mix the different varieties together, you can have some stronger fragrance. And this one is a mild fragrance, but I love it. The problem with hybrid hibiscus is you have to water it a lot. But I wanted to show you something from Hawaii that's not fake. So, my top 10 books of the year. According to Goodreads, I read 109 books, which is a lot for me. But I think I read even more than that because I think I forgot to put some books in. So that's a lot of books. And to narrow them down to 10 took a lot of thinking about what really touched me, what really stayed with me, what immersed me in the stories, or in the case of nonfiction, what resonated with me. So the first book, which is number 10 on my list, and the only book written by a man, is How Green Was My Valley by Richard Llewellyn. And I buddy read this with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. And we had a wonderful time. I never would have read this book by myself. I've had it on my shelf for a while. And it's a coming-of-age story of Hugh Morgan in Wales in the 1920s to 40s. And the reason that I say I would never have read it, it's not a book that I ordinarily read. It's a saga, a family saga. And I'm not really into family sagas, though a lot of booktubers are. But reading it with Sandy was a delight, and I was able to get through it. And she gave it 4.5 stars. I gave it 5 because of the language. In fact, it says, a beautiful story told in words which have Welsh music in them, and a book which will live in the mind and memory of its readers. So Hugh Morgan, in the beginning of the book, he says, I'm going to pack my 2 shirts with my other socks and my best suit in the little blue cloth my mother used to tie around her hair when she did the house, and I'm going down from the valley. So the valley is in Wales. And this book has so much in it, not only the language, but we follow you from a small boy until he's a man leaving the valley. And it has a lot of topics that are topical, like people ruining the earth, and it has just human relationships, and Bill's Doug Roman, which I found out last year means coming of age. And we really love you, Morgan. He's a feisty boy, and he finds his way in the world. Maybe not the way he expected, but yeah. So this is number 10. Number 9 is a novella. Actually, it's 2 novellas, and Quicksand and Passing. But the novella that stayed with me was Quicksand. And this was by, like I said, Nella Larsen. And it's has a lot. in this book that I resonated with, surprisingly, because I'm not from the 1920s. I'm not in the Harlem Renaissance. I am a writer, but the thing that got me really immersed in this story was the feeling of not belonging because of being of two, in her case, racial identities, in my case, cultural identities. But it's amazing how many of what goes in this novella there's so much happening in this novella, Quicksand. Okay, so we're following Helga Crane, who's half Danish and from immigrant Danish, and half black, Afro-Caribbean. This was her real identity, and a lot of things, I can almost say this is autofiction, or which I don't really like the name autofiction, but it really follows a lot of her life. And we start out, and she's at a university that is fashioned after Tuskegee University. And she is, so this is about the bourgeoisie of the Harlem Renaissance. But so she's educated at this, I'm trying to think of the name Xaxos or something like that. But it's really supposed to be a black university in that era. And she's not getting along with her experience there. And that's really the whole gist of the whole situation here, is that she doesn't belong anywhere, really. So she leaves the university because she doesn't like that they're being taught, these black students are being taught not to strive too much, to accept whatever they're given and not to be too greedy. And she doesn't agree with that. You know, she thinks that they should strive as much as they want. So she leaves the university, and there's a romance going on that I won't get into. And she goes different places. She ends up even in Denmark, where she's looked at as an exotic beauty because of the way she looks. And she ends up not even really, even though she, in real life, I heard Nella Larsen went to Denmark and enjoyed her experience there. In this book, she feels that she's exoticized too much, and men are wanting to marry her because of her looks, because she's different from the Danish women there. And she goes back, and she goes to Harlem, and then there's problems there, and then, you know, it's just like going from place to place, not really belonging anywhere. And the end was disappointing. It was too melodramatic for me to put it on the top. But I really, I felt immersed in the story. It's very short, and there's a lot happening, like I said. But what really got me was the feeling of not belonging to one or the other. She felt she was too dark. In real life, Nella Larsen was too dark to be accepted by the African Americans that she came across, because she was not exactly, she didn't have that experience. She came from immigrant parents, one from Denmark, a white mother, and Afro-Caribbean father. So she had different experiences, and she wasn't accepted by the white people because she was too dark. So yeah, the feeling of not belonging was very strong in this book, and it resonated with me as coming from Puerto Rican and Jewish heritage, not belonging, totally wanting to belong to Puerto Rican, but being very light-skinned, and not belonging to Jewish because of other reasons, of not being religious enough or being half Puerto Rican. But anyway, I resonated with this. I also like Passing. as well. Both of the endings couldn't make it to number one. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. So the next on my list is Luster by Raven Leilani. Now, Luster was a book on BookTube that was what they call a Marmite book. And I couldn't understand that because I resonated with the book. And we're following Edie. She's a young woman in her 20s living in Brooklyn. So maybe that's why I resonated with it. And it was said on BookTube that it's, and we'll have a picture of it over here, by the way. And it was said to be not a realistic book or to be a millennial book. I did not find it to be either one of those things, because growing up in that same neighborhood that she mentions, Leonard Street, it's the same neighborhood as A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, actually, but in modern days. And I did not find it to be a millennial book because I grew up in that neighborhood and knew people and went through the same experiences. Well, not the same as Edie, but very similar experiences. Okay, so what is it about? So Edie, she's an editorial assistant, and she's going through having one-night stands with men and not being happy and coming from a abusive family. And she meets a man, a white man in his 40s, who's supposedly in an open marriage. And she just moves in with him. And he has I don't know if he has an adopted black daughter. And it goes on from there. So Luster was a book that resonated with me because it reminds you of a childhood or a teenagehood, or even in your 20s, where you don't know where you're going, and you do crazy things, you do weird things, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. The writing was superb. I loved the writing. I loved the story. I loved everything about it. But like I said, it's a Marmite book, and people thought, oh, that couldn't happen. She couldn't just move in with, a guy, and his family. But I knew people who did that as late teens, 20s. You make mistakes in your life, and you learn from them or you don't. But anyway, I loved Luster. All right. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Okay. Well, she moves to New Jersey. I don't know if that's important. She moves to New Jersey, and with the man he's kind of weird, but anyway, I recommend it. It's on my top 10. Now, 10, 9, so we're getting to 8. And for 8, I chose Quartet and Autumn by Barbara Pym. I did read Barbara Pym's Excellent Women, which was recommended by Sean the Book Maniac, and as this was too. I can't tell, I loved Excellent Women, but this fit my, I have a little plan last year I should say, of reading older women by older women. Barbara Pym is described as the Jane Austen of her time, and I really agree, because she writes with such superb storytelling, as well as the feels. You get the feels. So this has taken place in England in the 1970s, and 4 workmates, and their names are Edwin, Norman, Letty, and Marcia, work in the same office and suffer the same problem, loneliness. So it says, lovingly and with delightful humor, Pym conducts us through the day-to-day existence, their preoccupation, their irritation, their judgments, and perhaps more keenly felt their worries about having someone missed out on life in post-war Britain. And you'd really feel each character and what they're going through separately. You don't know exactly what kind of work that they're actually doing. That's not really, they're working in an office that's, that the uppers are trying to make them, as they say in England, redundant. So they're about to lose all of their jobs. And one by one, we see what happens with them. And I really, really felt for these people because they're also trying to grapple with the 1970s and all, you know, not fitting in the new generation. So it has a lot in it. It's a perfect picture of loneliness that I really felt, you know, not fitting in again. Maybe that's my theme. Okay, so that's Quartet and Autumn by Barbara Pym. The next book, I hope I get these right in order. Yeah, I think I do. I usually don't like, or I haven't read many short story collections. But again, on Sean the Book Maniacs, he had Ellen Cassedy who put this together. It's a short story collection by Yenta Mosh, who was a writer of Yiddish language. Being half Jewish, that attracted me at once. But what really got me, I saw the author, like I said, was talking about this book on Sean's channel. And I knew I had to buy it, which I did. I found that it's an indie book, which makes it even more special to me because we need to be told these stories. Okay, so what is it about? It's sort of, again, autobiographical. Yenta Mosh, it starts out of her looking back at Bessarabia, which is now modern day Bulgaria. And she's looking back at her old home. The Jews were thrown out. And it goes into the gulags of the Soviet Union and what it was like being sent as a young girl. So this is also a woman's story. What happened to the women in the gulags? And the fact that it was written in Yiddish, really, my grandmother spoke only Yiddish. So we have these rich and complex stories. And yet, you know, some of them are very sad, but some of them are hopeful. And I really loved, I would say, all of the stories in this book, which is unusual in a short story collection. We also go on after the gulags, moving to Israel and having to deal with being, you know, coming from different places. So that's where On the Landing, the title comes from, because as Jews, they're also being thrown out and they're also, you know, leaving and coming, and you know, that's where On the Landing comes from. I love this book. I'm so glad I read it. And the fact that Yenta Mosh is no longer with us, but I think she just died in the 2013. And yeah, 2013, I was right. She was born and raised in Bessarabia. And she survived Siberian exile, and she settled in Moldova. And she stayed there a long time, and she never wrote anything there because, you know, it was the Soviet Union until she moved to Israel. And then she started writing. She has a wonderful background story to tell too. Anyway, I loved On the Landing. Now we're getting closer. And I'm losing track how many books, what I'm up to. We're down to the final 5. And these are the books that meant the most to me in the whole year. Number 5 is Edna O'Brien's The Country Girls. This, I already read this with Alba from Seriella. and we both loved it. It follows two girls in rural Ireland, Kate and Baba for short, Catherine and Bridget. This book had so much in it also. We follow them from rural poverty, abusive in some cases, in Kate's case. She has an alcoholic father. And we follow them to a convent school. And then finally, they run away from the convent school and a lot of stuff happens. But what I loved about this book, first of all, the language. This was written in the 50s and it was banned because the way they talk about the Catholic Church, the Catholic religion, the convent school, I heard that the local parish priest burned this book in the beginning. But after the 50s and the 60s, it became a classic, and for good reason. There's so much beauty in this book. There's so much story in this book. Baba is the mean girl in the beginning, and they have a friendship that's like a love-hate relationship. They're frenemies, but they stay together till the end. And I love that. And even though Baba is really mean to Catherine, it's delightful. I'm going to read you the first little paragraph here. I wakened quickly and sat up in bed abruptly. It is only when I am anxious that I waken easily, and for a minute I did not know why my heart was beating faster than usual. Then I remembered the old reason. He had not come home. So she's talking about her father. Her father is a big presence in this book, even though he's not in the whole book. There's so much beauty, the writing, the comedy, the pathos. There's so much in this book. So this is also a coming of age story. They're on the verge of womanhood, and they really want to get out of this town. But Catherine has a crush on somebody, an older man. I wonder why it's an older man. She calls him Mr. Gentleman. And that first love affair, which never comes to fruition, but affects her life in a lot of different ways. While Baba is, she takes more chances, and she is more of the outgoing girl. So they have bawdy innocence, it says. And there's a lot of places where I heard that Edna O'Brien was slut-shamed a lot after writing this book. And I don't see it, when we read it in today's, what goes on today, it seems so innocent. But I can see why in the 50s in Ireland, this would be a book that might be considered bawdy or even maybe pornographic in some areas. Not in our time at all. But anyway, I would read it just for the language alone. It's so beautiful. She's a beautiful writer, and I want to read more of her books. Country Girls is part of a trilogy. Country Girls is the first one. The Girl with the Green Eyes, or The Lonely Girl, is the second. And the third one I haven't read yet is Girls in Their Married Bliss. Before I end this, I want to show you some of the setting how beautiful the setting is. We drove home while it was still bright. The hills in the distance were blue, and the trees in the folds of the hill were a dusty lilac. Farmers were saving hay in fields along the roadside, and children were sitting on haycocks eating apples and throwing butts over the ditch. The smell of hay came through the window, half spice, half perfume. This is the kind of setting you're going to get, and I loved it. Okay, the next book is a book that I never would have found if it wasn't for BookTube. And I can't tell you how much I love this book. It's called Our Spoons Came from Woolworth. And to show how beloved this book is, it was introduced by Maggie O'Farrell. So it's by Barbara Comyns. So what Maggie O'Farrell wrote Hamnet, which is beloved on BookTube. She says, quite simply, Comyns writes like no one else. And that's true. The first line of this book says, it's classic. It says, I told Helen my story and she went home and cried. Is that the best beginning of a story? So we're following a 21-year-old artist's model, and she loves pets. She's married to a real, what they called a ne'er-do-well, Charles, and I wanted to slap him side the head a few times. And so she gets pregnant, she has a baby, and she almost starves to death. And yet it's the funniest book. I mean, there's a part in this book where she's giving birth in a poverty hospital. I don't know what you call it in England, but it's so funny. It's one of the funniest things, laugh out loud funny, yet sad at the same time. So it says, hoping to add some spice to her life, she takes up with Peregrine, a dismal aging critic, but comes to regret her marriage and her affair alike. However, virtue is more than its own reward, for repentance brings an abrupt end to the cycle of unsold pictures, unpaid bills, and unwashed dishes. So I love this book so much. I can't even tell you. And I never would have. This book is sort of a forgotten book and brought back, I think, by the British Library. I'm not sure. But I loved it so much. And, you know, the giving birth scene that I talked about, I gave birth in '69 in New York, not a city hospital. Yet some of the things that happened to her during her labor reminded me of mine and just made me laugh out loud. And it's really shows how poor that, you know, a couple could be, and how worthless some fathers could be about their own children. So anyway, this is Our Spoons Came from Woolworths. I loved it. 5 stars and number 4. The next book that I want to talk about, I read also as a buddy read with Freddie from Sluggish Reader, and it's Cora Sandel, Alberta and Jacob. And I talked about this quite a lot in my last video, so I won't go into it again. But we're following Alberta in the north of Norway, where it's also a coming of age story. And she's very shy, and she has a squint in her eye, which makes her hateful to her mother, which is very sad, and which I could relate to. And it goes into her relationship with her brother, which, as Freddie mentioned to me, is not a lot in the book. He's not a big character in the book, but like I told Freddie, I think the reason that it's Alberta and Jacob is because that's the person she felt beloved by and who she loved in her growing up, and who kind of saved her from having a totally horrible childhood. So I want to read this again before I can even recommend it higher, because as I said before, my copy, I bought a used copy, and a lot of pages I found impossible to read because they were faded. But I'm going to read the whole trilogy, hopefully this year. So that's Alberta and Jacob, number 3. Number 2, I don't have a copy of, because I took it out of the library as well, and it'll be here. And it's called Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong. So this is a it's funny that my favorite books of the year were nonfiction in some way. And this is a totally nonfiction book. And it starts with a prologue, and 1 in 5 people in the United States lives with a disability. I'm one of them. Some disabilities are visible, some less apparent, but all are underrepresented in media and in everyday life, popular culture. So this book came out as the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it shows us how far we've come, yet how not so far we've come, to put it mildly. And it's stories of women who deal with different disabilities, various disabilities. And I talked about this also quite a lot in my last video, or in a previous video. And the author, the editor, Alice Wong, also suffers from a disability. And we have like so many different types of disabilities represented. And I really feel that this is number 2 on my list. It could have been number 1. I suffer from a variety of disabilities, one of which is chronic pain. And we've had a big rainstorm, and I'm in a lot of pain yesterday and today, because when it rains, it brings on my severe arthritis. And I can't tell you, how many people live with chronic pain. I've had fibromyalgia my whole life before it was even had a name to it. And I also have an anxiety disorder. So all of these were represented, and many more that I'd never heard of, and was glad to hear the personal stories of these women. And I think they're all women. There might be one man, I'm not sure. But I think they're all women who suffer with, and some of them come from different sexual orientations, which is good. So that's represented. And I just couldn't put this book down. So I recommend it the highest possible level of reading experience for everyone should read this book. Just even if you don't have a disability, to understand what others go through. My favorite book, of 2021 is Underground in Berlin, a young woman's extraordinary tale of survival in the heart of Nazi Germany. I don't know who gave me this book to read, and I'm thinking that it was Janelle from Too Fond of Books. It is a memoir that was not written. It was told to her son. Her name is Marie Jalowicz Simon, and it's a remarkable tale of a woman, 21-year-old Jewish Berliner. It's so much about Berlin in this book too, who decides she's not going to end up in a concentration camp. So it sounds like it's going to be a downer. Of course, she survives to dictate this memoir in her older years. In fact, right before she died. But yet it reads like a thriller. She lives with people. The things she does to survive. This reads like the most thrilling thriller I've ever read. So she took shelter wherever it was offered, and it was offered in the beginning. One place that she stayed was with a Nazi. She stayed with a lot of communists. She stayed in good places, not so good places. In one place, she stayed with acrobats. This story, it gripped me from the beginning, and it shows a different kind of Berlin, a Berlin that's not all bad people. The Germans were all bad and the Jews were all good kind of story. Or the Jews were, of course, they went through the Holocaust, so I can't take that. I'm half Jewish, so I've lost people. But it also showed people who, weren't for Hitler and who helped people. You know, truthfully, there weren't that many that did do this, but there was enough to make this story my #1 book of the year. One thing that was said about this book, and that I really felt, was that it felt like it was happening. Her memory, and she became a famous scientist or something like that. She was very smart, and her memory, it reads like you're reading it from a young girl's perspective. And I appreciated that as a memoir writer myself. I appreciated her voice in this book is so strong and so brave. And you have to read this book if you're at all interested in just what survival can be to a young girl. It helped that she was beautiful. There's pictures of her. And, you know, she even says it, that helped that she was young and beautiful. But she starved, she suffered, and she survived. And I love this book so much. So there is my 10 favorite books of the year. I hope you pick up one of these books because they gave me so much pleasure and joy, as BookTube did this year, of reading books that I never would have thought of reading. And most of them are by women authors, which was my goal, but I didn't totally do that. I think I did that 95% of the time. I want to wish everybody a happy new year. And, you know, I wish everyone their heart's desire this year and the planet's desire that we get rid of this pandemic and that we flourish in whatever career or life that we desire. I'm hoping to finish my memoir this year. BookTube took me away a little bit. I have a full second draft, but I hope to have a full book. And reading these books helped me with a lot. You know, reading is the main skill to become a writer. You can't be a writer if you're not a reader. This is my true belief. And I was always a reader and a writer. But so the coming year, I hope to take it a little, I don't know if I'm going to read 109 plus books, but I want to read books that make me feel like these 10 books made me feel. So if you haven't already subscribed, please hit the notification bell, join me, comment, like, and I'll see you in my next video. I already talked about different plans. I have a different picture up, and my music is a little shorter, and I'm doing some changes on my channel. And I hope that you join me. And until we meet again, my friends, aloha.